Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another glorious adventure. I'm Chris, and you probably saw me if you're a morning watcher on the Dealing with the Devil show for Utopiana. Thomas John and I were basically giving a breakdown of our stance on the spiritual warfare of our times. And now it's time for something completely different, where I talk more about just the realities of our culture. The Awake Show is almost apocalyptic the more I look into what I discuss because as you really honestly approach the modern culture, you can see how everything's falling apart and how it seems like we're being squeezed. We're being squeezed to accept supernatural reality or not, or stay in the material, but the material isn't getting any better. So people are losing their minds, and it feels like there's a big squeeze. That's just my opinion. You can share. Maybe you're having a great time, but what's been going on definitely has people searching for answers. And for me, I found my answer, and I'm trying to give the answer in a way that the modern, very secular mind can see where I'm coming from. I don't like to just evangelize only one aspect of my beliefs, and on top of that, I think because I'm my brother's keeper. I, as a Christian, need to get involved in the culture and try to explain the Judeo-Christian the Judeo-Christian and the rationalistic thought. It's faith and reason, and why it's so important as we see our culture break down. So you see the title here. It's called "Stupid American Shamanism." And first, I have to define my terms. If I'm going to create an argument, I have to define my terms. What is a shaman? What do I call stupid American shamanism? And why is it stupid, right? American shamanism is this very new thing happening through the drug culture of the millennials to Gen X, but I think everyone, mostly millennials are interested in it. And at the first glance, it seems to be kind of what the hippies were into. We know that there was a drug culture with the hippies. Everyone knows about that. It's a big part of American history, the Woodstock thing. We know that there is obviously drug usage and experimentation with hallucinogenics. Marijuana is considered a hallucinogenic now, just not a very strong one, and it's not purely that. But there's this particular American shamanism is from this new interest in looking beyond what's beyond the veil, right? But it's a subconscious and unconscious one. A lot of these people come from this vein of disbelievers in organized religion, but still interested in the spiritual. And they don't really know why, I think. I know people who try out this drug and that in terms of the hallucinogenics, and they don't have a belief in anything, like I said in the trailer, like Joe Rogan, but they inherently want to see the supernatural and understand it. Um, Unfortunately, I'm glad I wrote notes, but unfortunately, I don't have the book, so I can't look kind of collegiate and read out from the book that I am using. But I will give the title for the book I learned from a Duke religious course. It's called Shamanism: Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, and by Mircea Eliade. So Mircea and then Eliade. He was a Romanian anthropologist who did a lot of research into the tribal, very primordial cultures that represent the spirituality that it seems that people are looking into. But the problem is that the reason why I call their American shamanism stupid is because the shamans, just like how the Buddhists think the New Age is dumb, and a lot of the Indian people that practice Indian religion see it as very superficial. The shamans are not pro Joe Rogan, to say the least. So the shamans think you're being dumb, and I think you're being dumb, and I don't agree with the shaman. So it's a cold water approach, but if you're going to get involved in something and you're actually honest, shouldn't you know the dangers and the meaning behind it? I mean, I wouldn't go into the wilderness and not know how to survive in the wilderness, but that's part of the ego of the average pseudo intellectual American agnostic pseudo lazy person who thinks they know it all. And this is really an extension of that, and they think they're smart. John mentioned Timothy Leary. Yes, Timothy Leary did begin this push for looking into using hallucinogenics to have an experience. Um, but when he when he did that, it kind of simmered down through, like, I'd say the 80s and the 90s. I don't know why, but it wasn't as well known. And then what happened was there was a website called the Silk Road. This was a deep web website that you can look up a documentary about the guy who founded it. And this really brought the drug culture back. People started selling hallucinogenics online to experiment, and then the millennial generation started getting interested again. But with the new age and the hippies, what happened with them was they became, very ironically, big corporatists. uh, so that little hippie spirit didn't last in them much. Or if there is any residual from that kind of liberation, loosey goosey atmosphere, it's the self help new age gurus. And there's a lot of that going on. It kind of devolved more into esoteric, twisted understandings of Eastern religion and using Eastern religion and law of attraction and things like that. Whereas what I see with the millennials is they're not so much interested in, as far as I know, there will always be people that are in the occult. But for people my age, they just want to have an experience. It's more of a more like, I just want to see what this drug will do. I'm bored. That's what we're seeing now. So, is there some crossover with the new age with this idea of, crystals have power, and the power of the mind and transcendental meditation? There is some, but the vast majority are just doing it out of pure curiosity, which again isn't the not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying that that's what they're doing it for. And then they come back and they act like they've, experienced enlightenment, and then some of them drift into Buddhism, and then others drift into like this tree hugging spirit kind of. I don't know. They just kind of go back to the sofa and they love trees and nature a bit more. Um, so that's the American shaman. And why do I say shaman? Because these particular drugs that they're ingesting, I don't know if they're looking it up. I think Joe Rogan mentioned it once, but these drugs are actual religious intoxicants used in shamanic tribes, particularly of the upper Amazon and sometimes with the some Southwest American tribes, right? So you have this idea that they take the drugs, it opens their mind, and then they shamanize with the spirits. Um, and so, but these people that are taking it don't even realize what they're getting into. Uh, a lot of a lot of strange ideas have come from just taking hallucinogenic. Now, from my Christian perspective, it's bad if you're a baptized Christian because it offends God. And the devil can, like we discussed in our show, mess with you and you don't even realize it, plant all kinds of bad seeds in your head. And generally, as long as he's taking you away from God, and you don't even if you don't realize it, his plan is done. So in terms of salvation, um, that this is taking you away from God. It's not healthy for for finding redemption. It is not true enlightenment, and it really shows, because if the Buddhists are saying you're not getting enlightened, and the shamans are saying you're doing dangerous things that will get you in trouble, I mean, if those people are saying it, and then I'm supposed to evangelize them, and they're trying to rebuke you, what does that say about you, right? Um, so let's talk about what shamanism is, so we can understand my point, and why there needs to be a reset from this very naive, voyeuristic understanding of spirituality. They think spirituality is this IMAX movie where you can just, as long as you're seeing cool things, flashy things in your head, you've become enlightened. Like you, and there's a saying that Carl Jung says, "Beware unearned wisdom." Um, there's just so much acedia and lack of discipline, to the point where people think that smoking a temporal drug will fix your life, and there are people actually trying to say that it did. um I don't buy it. There's some people, and usually those are the people that fly all the way to Peru, and they actually go to the shamans and they get guidance, and they usually get better results. But I guess they believe in Peruvian animism. I don't know. But a shaman is not what you think. Everyone thinks that a shaman is someone who does drugs. Now, and thanks to Joe Rogan, a shaman is someone that does drugs, these mind-opening drugs, and they trip out and they communicate with spirits. Okay, but it's actually completely flipped around. Okay, so according to I am butchering his name. I know it. Mircea Eliade, a shaman is a particular practice that originated in Central Asia. And we know that people moved from Central Asia to the North American hemisphere, right? We know that they moved, and this particular form of spirituality moved with them throughout the world. There is some coincidental shamanism in Africa, and I'll talk about the Bushmen. But essentially, what a shaman is he is a person who is not a priest. Okay, a priest is separate from a shaman. Both interact with the spirit world, but a shaman would be someone that has powers and they can ascend into the heavens or the underworld. They are often medicinal healers and magical healers. They have powers, essentially. And when you read the book Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, I don't know where I put it. I really just had it a moment ago. I would be reading. Fortunately I remember what he says, but you read it and you notice that for the grand majority of these tribes, they pass down their powers. In fact, I remember my mother, when we went out to California, we ran into some Native Americans, and one of them was actually explaining how she started having these interesting dreams, which is actually a result of, because her father was a medicine man. This dream, this vision quest, I think that's called, or dream quest. I don't know what it's called, but their particular form of that is passed down from generation to generation. Um, You'll also notice that in shamanic initiation in the book, most Turkaic and even Central Asian shamans do not use drugs. They use symbolism in their masks and the drums, and they usually have a teacher and guides, and they use music and artistry to bring the mind and to summon the spirits. It's also kind of a faith thing. They have to believe that the spirits are around them, and eventually they have a breakthrough and they start to be able to go into ecstasy. They can, flights of spirits and different things, and they can see the gods and things like that. And this is just really interesting that they're doing this without the use of a mind altering substance. And it's not, according to them, it's not something that, we think of, well, maybe they're using some kind of Buddhist meditation. It's not. It's almost an instantaneous thing. It's a magical thing. It's something that happens usually on a particular date or when the person's ready, and they immediately have these powers, and it's a very special thing. Um, and this is what makes up most pantheistic and panentheistic tribal religion. When people started to run into the Native Americans and then later into the Amazonian tribes, I remember reading a book from my grandma, a history textbook from my grandma's. She's like 103, and she's goes all the way back to early 1900s. And when they wrote about these tribes, they still call them savages, and they would write about the superstitions of the savage tribes, right? And that's a Christian perspective of what they think it is. They think it's a superstition, which means they fetishize or believe in magic that is not of the Christian. It's opposed to the Christian faith and the belief of a higher power, and that's true. But it didn't give this. They didn't have the full details of what was going on, and it's so stupid how you have these guys. I put up the meme here, right? The fedora meme. Not everyone will know this one. Only if you're like my age or younger. Probably even I don't even know if the Gen Z know this one, right? But let's flash back to my college years, and you had this atheism plus, or this new trend of being an atheist. It was so cool to be an atheist. Oh, you've just discovered the secret. The secret is that there's no God. Oh, wow! And everyone would just like celebrate, right? There's no God. And what a mockery atheism plus has become. It is completely fallen apart. The new atheism movement is in shambles. They have no idea what's going on with them because, well, first of all, they're pseudo intellectual. They would spout off stuff like Jesus wasn't a real person. Have you ever seen that comment? Jesus wasn't a real person. What a lazy, arrogant, copied and pasted opinion that is not grounded on any of the Roman historians or any of the secondary or primary sources, rooted in what happened around the time of Pontius Pilate. Jesus was a real person. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but actually he was. And then they backed off of that. The cowards that they are. They backed off because there's this whole generation of everyone gets a trophy thing. There's this, everyone gets a trophy. I'm smart, and my daddy and mommy sent me to college because I'm smart, and because everyone goes to college, therefore I'm smart. I'm just the most enlightened Einstein, Friedrich Nietzsche, big brained, smarty pants that has ever lived. And I know the science, and the science proves that there is no God, right? And yet when you pick apart their arguments, they literally just have the sloppiest things ever. Here's another one, and they like to say God is dead, right? Friedrich Nietzsche. They like to quote that. Okay, Friedrich Nietzsche was not a believer. That's true. He actually he actually eventually began to lose his sanity in the latter parts of his days, and he attributed it to his mind going so deep, and he was constantly trying to think of a better morality than Christianity. But the context of the quote, God is dead and we have killed him, is not atheism, yet they use it for atheism. Friedrich Nietzsche was a very rebellious character for sure, but when you read his actual explanations of beyond good and evil and the slave morality dynamic, he was criticizing the lack of intellectual uh, girth and depth in Christianity at the time. And that's true. I'm reading a book called School of Darkness by Eliade. And although the Christianity was very prevalent, most lay people did not understand why that they believed in something. They were raised to believe in it. And that's a shame because we're actually supposed to educate ourselves to why we believe on it. We're supposed to educate ourselves on the philosophical and theological groundings of our faith. And that was the point. Friedrich Nietzsche saw the lack of virtue and the lack of intrinsic seeking the heights of morality and perfection within the Christians around him. And he was trying to say that in a shock value statement. But in that, I read the chapter, I took a course in Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. In that particular chapter, he was not trying to say God doesn't exist. He wasn't like Richard Dawkins. Um, and not to mention, he one of his favorite characters is who? Zarathustra, Zoroaster, right? He loved Zoroaster, and Zoroaster is um, a Zoroastrian religious figure who is very, Zoroastrianism, there's a little bit of crossover between that and Judaism and Christianity. And Zoroastrianism has a lot of similarities with Christianity, and definitely Nietzsche identified him as almost a prophetic, messianic truth seeker. So I don't think Nietzsche was like he didn't hate people of faith. He just didn't like blind faith without reason. And that may be why he fell away from his own faith. I mean, who knows? I'm not judging the man's soul. But so more of these pseudo intellectual quotes. So the atheism, these guys were so arrogant, and 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 in the end they were full of it. They were full of air. They act like they're smart, but they made such obvious mistakes. um then you had the Richard Dawkins, right? He was a big atheist, completely against religion, and he was just constantly about how there's no objective proof of God. There's just really no objective proof of God in the natural, and it's just and it's so weird because if you're an actual true academic, at least in terms of philosophy, right? And Richard Dawkins was not a philosophy major. He should have stayed in his lane where he's comfortable as a biologist. But he tried to play armchair philosopher and he failed miserably. You do not push the material thesis of science onto a category of thought that is supposed to go beyond what cannot be perceived by the senses. It's so dumb. It's literally the same thing as saying, well, there's no objective proof as to why cheating on your wife is bad if as long as you can hide it, or there's no objective proof as to why this math equation is correct. I mean, it's, and I'm talking about the theoretical math, or there's no objective proof as to the reality of human emotions and transcendence, right? And there's this obsession with it. It needs to be under a microscope to be real. But these very same people, now there's something very weird going on here. These very same people, once again, they beat their chest, they got all cocky, they started stepping out, they started looking for low hanging fruit, they started looking for fundamentalist Christians that don't that did some very bad things, and they look for cults, and look at how religion makes people so bad. And then this is another phrase I liked, right? Religion is responsible for most of the world's atrocities. I would see that copy and paste everywhere, and then finally Christians started fighting back and were like, well, actually, buddy, old pal, communism and the progressive ideologies of the 20th century have killed way more than any crusade or inquisition ever has. And even then, if you really want to go there, just because they're bad Christians doesn't mean we have to include them as examples of Christian behavior. So that drops it down to zero, because anyone who's um, not following the doctrines of Christ can't be considered a true disciple. So if there were Christians that pillaged and looted and raped in different cities, well, they're anathema. Like, they don't count. If there was shady dealings in the Inquisition, and yes, I did look into. I've also took a course in that. There was a lot of state intrigue. It was done. A lot of it was done underneath the table. A lot of the torturing going on. A lot of it was political. Well, for me, that doesn't count, because again, that's not true discipleship of Christ. It doesn't. Now, I'm not a pacifist. I believe a country should be allowed to defend itself. There is just war doctrine. But for me, like, it's always going to be zero, because a true disciple of Christ will follow the message of the gospel, and that includes positive spiritual things that build up love in the world. So again, they would just throw out these things, and they would and because they're smart and then they're in the college, this would be taken as gospel, and these fools were considered the new enlightenment. This is where this is the beginning of where we see the American shamans. Okay. What does that have to do with American shamans, this whole thing? Well, this is what happens. Okay. When you deny the reality of the soul and the reality of God, and you think you've completed your entire quest for meaning in the universe by saying, my mind is the most important thing in the universe. I am. Well, certain things start happening. The first thing that started happening was the atheists soon got overrun by other progressive ideologies, such as socialism and feminism. And these people, there's many different kinds of unbelievers. These people were unbelievers because they hated the morality of Christianity, thought it was stifling. And the atheists welcomed them with open arms. One, because, well, we need more people in our flank. But the other secret dark reason is because most of these guys were single young men, and let's just say most of the feminists and socialists were women. So there was a little bit of let's just say these guys are kind of puppy dogs. If you know these types, they're usually very weak to a woman's wiles, and they are really, like, they are suckers, to say the least. They fall for it every time, uh, and so they let them in, and they had this big. Yay, we're progressive for all the big umbrella of not believing in God. We're so great. Well, as time progressed, they started to realize there was a lot of infighting going on as they logged into their atheist forums. And there were things about toxic masculinity, and how gender isn't real, and how men are all rapists, and all of these whacked out theories that were also being produced. And they were like, well, that's a little bit concerning, but not too bad. At least they're still atheists. At least they know they believe in the good word, atheism, the book of atheism. So we'll let them be. And you can check out. He's actually apparently going to be in some of the history textbooks. This is a central role in what happened. But there's a guy by the name of Sargon of Akkad on YouTube who is sent in. He started off as a big skeptic atheist, and slowly but surely, the socialists and feminists quickly began to go after anything that was male, like toxic and male, and that included video games. And then something happened called Gamergate, where there's this big drama where suddenly there's this big world war over video games. Video games are toxic, they're violent, they show patriarchy. And so the atheists had this big splitting apart between the conservative atheists, or at least the non social justice warrior atheists, and the progressive atheists. And then it turned out that a lot of these people that said they didn't believe in God did believe in religion. They just were usually into to Wicca or New Age. For whatever reason, women are not into atheism nearly as much as men. I don't know. Maybe is it a macho rebellious spirit to go, screw you, God, you don't even exist. It's all BS. I don't care. It's all a pack of lies. I mean, I guess I have a little bit of that in me too, and other things. I guess it's part of the male spirit, but women do not like to go hardcore. There's nothing. They usually, even if they step away from organized religion, they usually try to find something else to fill their their time, to fill their meaning of existence. So that was the beginning of the collapse of atheism. And there were also other problems. Like, for example, you can say there's no God, and you can have all these reasons to why you're better off to divorce yourself from God and religion, but the matters of the heart and still soul are still there. And I just find it hilarious how, again, I think I mentioned this in my trailer, but the interest in the supernatural in video games, movies, fantasy books, and of course in these drugs which simulate the supernatural is at an all-time high. On top of that, relationships are crumbling. People do not know how to interact with each other in loving ways. They're losing, they're falling into despair and depression. There's all of these problems that psychology is failing to fix. There's all kinds of issues. Crime is on the rise, right? And yet they try to sit there and tell themselves there's no such thing as the soul. There's no such thing as God. As their own mind breaks down because the weight of that despair takes its toll. And I'm starting to see it with these guys. I mean, they're not healthy people. All right, they need to hit the gym. They need to go outside. All right. There's a few, maybe a few that are healthy, but they're not. They're not motivated. They're not. They often have lots of problems, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's the toll of having, you've given up on the point of your existence, which is become one with God. Now, I don't completely blame them because we have a very watered down Christianity, which can easily disillusion people um, and make them doubt. But that's what's going on there. So we have all of these um, nihilists who are really suffering. And this is where all of this escapism starts, right? Um, we're at an interesting crossroads. A lot of these people that are on the right wing, in terms of the skeptics, are slowly, stubbornly starting to give up the ghost on their skepticism, and they're looking up two big figures on the scene. There's the two big figures on the scene for the millennial and the right wing atheist agnostic are Joe Rogan and Dr. Jordan Peterson. Okay, because what's happening is and I think they're starting to repent of this. Sargon had an interview with Jonathan Pageau, and they're realizing that they really opened the Pandora's box. When you actually delete God, in comes communism and all kinds of anti-life and anti-family evil stuff. And they're thinking to themselves, we screwed up here. In our arrogance and in our obsession against God, we deleted objective morality and something higher to aspire to than ourselves, something that keeps us in check. And now Pandora's box is open. I'm sure many of them have guilty consciences on the whole thing, and they feel like they've been duped by their own self deceit and by the academia. Um, Joe Rogan represents the a mixture. There's also people that are joining the dark side. There's people that are in my prayers, and I hope they just give in to Jesus already and just admit that they were wrong and that they'll be a lot better off. And then there's people that, if you stop believing in God, well, they just double down on the hedonism and narcissism. And Joe Rogan kind of, he appeals to both aisles, but I see a lot of the more of the left slash libertarian skeptics on there. And the other way to soothe the ache of nihilism is to find something that appeals to your sense of adventure and your sense of needing meaning in the universe, while at the same time not being part of organized religion. And this is why people do the heavy duty drugs. And I don't mean the narcotics. Some do. We're talking about the shamanic substances. Okay. So they're tapping into spirituality while refusing to believe it's real. Uh, and they're not having good experiences, a lot of them. On top of that, they're getting very strange ideas about globalist, environmentalist things. And once again, they're falling for it. They're letting the devil plant seeds in their heads and using emotions, and they're going to go off into an even worse ideology. They're still stuck on the root of I'm smart and I don't need to check myself and I know what I'm doing. So that's where it came from. I gave the whole timeline of where all of this is coming from. And another thing that the atheists said, which completely corrupted our Western mindset, is this idea that for some reason, I don't know how they could, when they really sit on it, it sounds like the dumbest thing ever. But they have this idea that religion was created by the state throughout history. And everyone, through the fear of death, conspired to placebo themselves or maybe mass hysteria themselves into belief in God. You got all these crazy people, everyone's an emotional wreck, and out of their despair, they come up with these new ideas to try to soothe their pains. And the rest of it was, well, these pagan people, um, they worshipped the forces of nature because they didn't understand science yet. And believe it or not, this was also a Christian mindset at the time too. This even before then, again, people used to think they were actually just worshiping the sun and the sky, um, because they didn't understand science. That's not true. Believe it or not, that is not true. And we're seeing it through people now that they're interacting with this stuff, and you actually look at what they're experiencing. Um, Joe Rogan and et al. Are noticing that religion comes from spiritual experience first. Religion is the interpretation of the cosmic and the supernatural, not the creation of the cosmic and supernatural through, human concoction. And one of the reasons I say this is because, well, first of all, cults that do that try to force, like Scientology and all that, don't last very long. For whatever reason, they just don't have much staying power because people often see through it, and that's why they seek very weak-minded people. People actually aren't that dumb and aren't that um, weak intellectually, except unless you want to count people that believe mainstream media, which I consider kind of the biggest, most successful cult. But we'll get into that for another time. They actually do see through that, and the sheer accounts of people experiencing supernatural and paranormal phenomena is so huge when you actually look at the historical writings of people, and there's so many coincidences. It's impossible for it to be all made up. Okay. I could literally spend the rest of the 20 minutes of this broadcast listing. I don't know why people insist on something that is shoved in their face to not be real. There must be something they're so repulsed by it. There must be something they're so scared of, because the truth is the miraculous is easily accessible and open to scrutiny. Let me give you a few historical events alone, okay? But there's also, and personal stuff. Check out the documentary on the Shroud of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Check out Eucharistic miracles. Okay, you can write this down. Check out the miracle of the sun and many miracles around the Marian apparitions. Check out, beyond even Christianity, the precise calculation of the arrival of Hernando Cortez by the mystics of the Aztecs. Did you know that happened? They actually were waiting for them at the shore. They thought a god was coming over the shore, and they got down to the precise date. Well, it must be, they must have, maybe Cortez sent them like a warning shot, and they had like this big, prank they wanted to pull on us reading it, like let's prank them. Let's prank it. But no, no, Cortez attested to it too. Um, Check out, look up faith healings. This is something that scientists look into. Now, of course, there's studies that say faith healings aren't very common, and that's true because sometimes God doesn't answer prayers, but many people believe in it, and the sheer anecdotal evidence of, if you actually went around asking about, you can ask doctors and psychiatrists and people of faith of different miracles and things, overwhelming evidence. Poltergeists. There's been poltergeists in the news. Okay? Um oh man, I could just keep going. Well, our show, you can just go back an hour. Our show on dealing with the devil. We discussed exorcisms and how no, the priests do not exorcise mentally ill people, because the first thing the exorcist does is check to see if they're mentally ill, and he confers with psychiatrists. It's a very lengthy process, and there are particular supernatural phenomena that have to be exhibited in order to really prove that there's a possession going on. Okay? I mean, I belong to prayer groups that have miracles happening all the time. I wish I could go to the list. Maybe I should have a miracle show. Maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need just a miracle show. Like, uh, that's what Christian. Maybe that's what we have to do as Christians. Just keep blasting people with miracles and just like rubbing it in their face. I don't know. So then okay, so then the atheists probably got hit by the Catholics, and the Orthodox came to town, and they got their butts kicked. And so now the new atheist things to say, well, bro, there's things that science just can't explain yet. So can we at least admit that if you're a skeptic, you have your own faith, that there's no way that there can be a God. You have your own faith. You have your own religious believing, because whatever you're given evidence or phenomenon that you can't explain, you refuse to believe that there's a possibility of there being a God. You always go back to the thesis of it can't be a God, right? So now this whole thing is kind of blowing up in their face, and they're looking stupider and stupider the more we really look back on this whole thing. Okay, and now they're trying to play. Joe Rogan and a lot of these people are trying to play the shaman. Now they're moving on to something else. Now they're saying, well, there's energies, and there's maybe parallel universes and different realms. I smoked this stuff, and I was blasted out of my mind for 30 minutes, and I saw Mother Earth, and I saw this and that. And again, they still think they're smart. They still think they're smart. Okay, so you want to play shaman now? Well, the shamans say this. Every religion has a belief in trickster spirits. Did you know that? If you've actually studied cultural anthropology and religion, you would know that there is an idea of evil spirits and good spirits. Buddhism's got it. Shamans have it. Different tribes have it. The Navajo have it. The Apache have it. The Taoists have it. The Christians have it. The Protestants have it. The Catholics have it. Oh my gosh. They all got it. The Shintoists have it. It's a universal phenomenon. So you want to play with the big boys, you want to get involved in spirituality. But what you believe in is still not really that, because you still think it's your chemical in your mind. And these geniuses think, well, since it's my mind, then the beings in my mind are me, and therefore they must have important wisdom to impart to me. So they talk to any entity that is in their trip because they think they can learn something great about themselves from it. They think they're psychoanalyzing. First of all, even if you want to play that ball game, why do you trust your own mind? Do you actually believe that your mind can't even if I went by your logic here, Joe Rogan, if you actually believe that your mind is perfect and therefore you can always learn something from it, that is the height of narcissism. You're trying to tell yourself that, what if you're mentally ill or something? You're trying to tell yourself that everything you can possibly need comes from your brain, and your brain is always correct. Now, even a good psychologist can tell you that's a below to baloney. So you see how these people are just arrogant. They're not even that smart, right? Okay, so maybe now you have to dance back. Okay, well maybe it is my mind. So then what do they say? Well, maybe the gods are energies we don't understand. So the excuses keep piling up, right? All the while they're talking to entities and things, which are demons. Okay, I'm gonna tell you right now, right? I you know, we're, I believe that a demon can become an angel of light, and that's the whole point. That's a very deep, profound thing you have to understand to get into spirituality. That not all that glitters is gold. But you're gonna go talk to anything that moves, even the scary stuff. Well, maybe the scary clown that looks like some kind of, it the clown in my DMT trip. Yes, I'm not joking. They're called jester clowns. This is a common DMT experience. So they're gonna talk to the it the clown from the horror movie, and they think it the clown has something to tell them about their lives that is important. Well, why don't you put on makeup? Why don't you go join It the Clown? Seems like you're getting there. It seems like you're becoming a clown the more you speak. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. So that is the American shamanism that Joe Rogan is trying to package and manufacture and sell out. Maybe he has a stock in some of this stuff and he sells drugs on the deep web. I don't know what it is, but he has no idea what he's talking about. Okay, and yet everyone listens to him for advice. Okay, now that we've established that you guys are clowns and you keep walking back on all of these ideas you say are cemented in stone, but then you change up everything. The truth about shamanism is that, and religion in general, is that most religious experiences are not through drugs, although they are sometimes used. Okay, in fact, in the Indo-Aryan shamanic um, tribes, okay, these are the people that came up with Hinduism. Actually, there's actually a lot of evidence that Hinduism began as a shamanic religion that turned to an organized religion. But there's also other Central Asian religions, and they consider they openly say that the drugs that they take is actually a step down and is not true flight of spirit. It is not true spirituality. It's usually used as kind of like an aid, and sometimes it's completely done away with because it was always a moment it was always controversial to them. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Well, let's go back into the primitive mindset here. Not primitive as in they're dumb, as in primitive as in the days before electronics. And let me explain something very clearly. People back then didn't mess around. There was no science, correct? So there was this whole marketplace for miracles. Imagine like going on Amazon for miracles. And this is even recorded in the Bible. There were the professional prophets and soothsayers, and the true prophets that God sent down. And there would often sometimes be battles between them, right? The prophets of Baal versus Elijah, Moses versus the Egyptian sorcerers. People went to these people for results. Okay, so if this is all poppycock and they're making it up, why would anyone believe in it? If there's that was their go-to. So when these people say the medicine man healed me or he foretold this and that, this is a culture that relies for survival often on these magical powers. So something supernatural is happening. Okay? Something definitely is happening, or they would have gone off to the other shaman. And then, to make things even more confusing, sometimes there would be battles between the shamans and all of that. Again, I mentioned the God's prophets versus the other prophets. Um, uh, and so sometimes one guy would have more power than the other. Maybe the one god is more powerful than the other. But we're not talking about some abstract thing. We're talking about, yo, this guy made it rain right when he said it was going to rain. And multiple times he said it was going to rain. And this guy, cast a spell on him and he plopped dead the next day. And this guy healed my grandma, of an ulcer like that. Boom, it was crazy. And then people get excited, and that's how the religion starts. Okay. Um, Now I'm going to blow your mind even further. When these people shamanize and they go to the underworld or they go to the heavens, they clearly often experience the same thing over um, over over thousands of miles of distance without having any connection to the other person. So when I read this book and I was reading about the accounts of these people, very common things are there. There's usually an experience of experiencing a huge cosmic tree. Like how the Norse people, they have in the Norse mythology, you have 9 realms. Guess what? People in Central Asia, people in Greece, people in India, people in South America experience, although different names, and they interpret the entities differently. There is the same experience of the tree, this tree that goes up and down the realms. There is the same throughout all of the spiritual experiences that back up these religions. There is an experience of the underworld. They believe that sinners go to the underworld. Now, whether you call it Hades or Hel, the Norse hell, or whatever, there is an imaginative experience of hell. They all believe hell exists and some kind of heavens exist. Okay? Another universal thing. They believe in um, a sky father. Usually there is a king god. Now, again, the religion is the interpretation and the doctrine of the experiences of a spiritual person, right? So, like how Moses experienced God on Mount Sinai, he comes down the Ten Commandments. The Desert Fathers, and even today, right, you have saints. It's very interesting. If you actually look at how even my spirituality works, what happens is holy people go out into the middle of nowhere, and they come back with like these devotions and wisdom, and they're often persecuted by their peers, right? There's so many. If you look into the lives of saints, they usually get mocked for a while, just like the prophets were, and then later they're found to be people have more experiences and they're like, yeah, there's something to this. There's something to this rosary. There's something to this Divine Mercy Chaplet. There's something to the Ten Commandments. Yeah, that was crazy. So again, I'm poo-pooing more on this idea that religion is just a big made-up conspiracy by the state government. It's not true. It's just not. And you're a pseudo-intellectual who did not do his or her homework if you believe that. If you actually study the cultural anthropology and history of religious peoples, it is not just a drug-induced fabrication. And it is not just some big behind the scenes um, lie, and the opiate of the masses, as they say. If anything's a construction, it's our materialism and atheism. Okay. Now, this also helps. This also helps me introduce why, if you're interested in why Christianity, right? Why Christianity instead of X, Y, and Z? The idea of Christianity is not about whether or not the afterlife exists or God exists. Okay? It is about whether or not there is an infinite, benevolent, loving God who loves human beings personally to such an extent he would die on the cross for their sins, free them from whatever you want to call it, karma or sin, and that faith in him will save the soul. Okay? That is it. That is the reason why you should listen up and open your Bible and maybe consider becoming a Christian. The other religions believed in power and experience. Okay? When you read this book, you'll see that they did believe in all of these faiths often believe in some kind of morality, but they don't believe in much in salvation. They believe, if you remember what the Greeks believed, right? And the Greeks are considered a shamanic religion at first. Remember the oracle at Delphi? She would inhale volcano fumes and she would hallucinate the gods and things like that. But they believed that most people went to the underworld because it was so impossible for the soul to be perfected to go to heaven. Um, and the other reason is the gods of these religions are not necessarily benevolent; they're just feared. Okay, the prophets of and the saints and the priests of the Judeo-Christian faith come into these areas and prove the might and power of the Almighty God through the revelation of Jesus Christ. And this is something that happens not just through culture, but spiritually. There's actual spiritual conversions that happen that most people don't talk about because most people in the West are too stuck on this stupid thing to even pay attention to anything going on in their heads or in their souls. But that's usually what would happen. Okay. Um, and so not only is there an all-powerful God that we can trust and will protect us, we don't need to go from one aisle to the next, but also that he loves us and gives us meaning to what is important. Okay? So why should the Christian not be obsessed with power and divinization and the occult? Well, it's not just because God said don't do it, but I also believe it's because since we can rely on God for power and providence, and since our faith is centered on believing He's so intimate and protective of us, we don't need to do any of that. He will take care of us. Then the focus is now on the redeeming of the soul. Okay, so there's a Bible passage for all these people that are into. Now my Bible's gone. What's going on here? It's like all the books I need are gone, but that's okay. Right? There's a Bible passage where I think St. Paul says one could be taken up into the third heaven and still be lost, right? Just because you experience something incredible, an ecstasy even a holy ecstasy or an apparition. LAX mentions that he had an ecstasy. People on this channel who pray experience amazing things. That is that may be God drawing you closer, right? But that does not mean you have completely worked out your salvation in fear and trembling, because all that is something to inspire you. You could have the most amazing roller coaster ride. You could go on vacation to the moon. You could take ayahuasca and see, I don't know, like a big tree and elves and stuff. You could watch an amazing movie. You could even see Mary in an apparition. But and it's hard for me to explain. But what we're concerned with the most is our virtues and how we work out our relationship with Jesus and become more like Jesus. And that's where the good stuff really happens. That's where things become more permanent. That's where you start to lock down that peace beyond understanding. And that's why, what we've been doing here, Thomas has been doing the spiritual canticle by St. John of the Cross, which is he is a doctor of the church, and St. John of the Cross really gave a great wealth of knowledge, and St. Teresa of Avila, on the fact that a Christian mystic goes way beyond what a person in a pagan religion does, because God helps them to detach from even the imaginative, trippy, sensory aspects of our faith, right? And so that we attach to God alone. He said in the most recent one this morning, he said, only charity really remains. We're just led into complete darkness. That's going to be fun, but he'll get us through it, right, Liz? um, but why is that? Well, to me, I can't tell you why God does things, but at least from my perspective, it's almost as if, like, if we believe that heaven is taken care of and so many things are taken care of by a benevolent, loving God, then it isn't really any of our business to poke around in that if He's already preparing that for us in heaven, right? It's not that it's just spooky and bad. There's a deeper reason behind why Christ is the revelation and He is the truth, the way, and the life, and why He is the fulfillment of everything. Um, for one more bullet point to why I am not this. Richard Dawkins said something on, I think, Joe Rogan's podcast, and he was like, technically everyone is an atheist to some extent because some people don't believe in the gods of another religion. And very smart. I'm Richard Dawkins, and that was a good one, Richard Dawkins. Very good, Richard Dawkins, right? And Joe Rogan's like, wow, man, oh, that's really true, man. Yeah, totally, totally, right? Typical Joe Rogan. Uh, and and that's not true necessarily. Now, maybe for some people, but um, and I took the other religion course I took was on the Old Testament. Now, a religion course isn't the theology course. A religion course in college is where archaeologists and cultural anthropologists just write down the evidence as to certain things happening in the Bible and use the language translations to explain the interpretations of the patriarchs and the prophets. But they don't assert any theological um, reality or ontological reality. They just leave it at that. Okay. Um, but they did say this: the Jews did not. They were not a monotheism; they were a monolatry, which means for a long time, and this is true, they did believe in the gods of the other people, like the Babylonians. But they believed that the Lord of hosts, the God of Jacob, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, Abraham, was more powerful. That's and that was a reality. If you really look at it carefully, I mean, they clearly had times they went up against the magical forces of another people, the walls of Jericho, anyone, right? And the prophets of Baal, and it happened in Egypt, right? The snake, Moses' staff turned to a snake, ate the Egyptian snakes, right? They clearly believed in that. So, Richard Dawkins, you're still wrong. It's not that we don't believe in the spirit world, and I do believe that there's, like, there are universal realms. Even in the Bible it says there's how do I put this? The princes and powers and principalities and powers in heavenly places, right? Like fallen. Saint Paul talks about how there's like basically he's saying that demons have their own fake heavenly realms, okay, and they can make up their own, like they can pretend to be helpers, and they're and all that, which I believe, right? So it's not that I don't believe that there's all kinds of stuff beyond the veil. It's just that I believe that God is the king, Jesus is the king, and only he can save, and that we don't have to mess around with this stuff anymore. We can step away from the darkness of an eating a medicine man, or to sacrifice this and that, and the whole kit and caboodle and druids and all this, because we found something better. We found the ultimate, the infinite. And when you actually read these shamanic accounts, some of them say that they actually go up there, and they usually, many of them do believe in an all father, or a great spirit, as that's a Native American term, or some creator, but they can't reach him. He's cut off. And what happens when a missionary goes to these people, believe it or not, is many times, if done right, if done in the Orthodox way, when the people convert, and there's some miracles, their psychic and spiritual understanding changes, and they see that the abstract creator God that kind of gets mentioned, but they think he's too far out there, actually revealed himself through Jesus, and they're overjoyed. You can't match the fervor of a converted people. You can't, because they experienced going from one thing which they thought was pretty cool but kind of scary, to a whole nother level. That's the conversion we're talking about. It's not that they're like, oh well, you know what, we made up a religion, and let's go with this made up religion because the conquistadors have guns to our heads. All right, that isn't always the case. All right, I don't approve of that. What the conquistadors did was bad, but there are plenty of other accounts of pagans being converted through true religious conversion. Um, and Adam Bomb, I'm not saying that Rogan promotes. I'm not saying that Rogan openly promotes preachy atheism, but he does promote this constant pseudo skepticism and curiosity spirituality, which I find to be dangerous and lacking in depth. Um, even the shamans from these tribes say so. So he needs to engage in more depth if he's really interested in it, or it just propagates more nothingness, more acedia, more going nowhere fast, or going worse. So that is the problem. Um, not I like Joe Rogan. I'm not saying I don't like him. I just don't like this particular aspect of his constant drug pushing. That's my problem with what Joe Rogan does. Um, Anything else that I mentioned? I know I'm missing one more thing. Oh, okay, okay, got it, Adam. Um, so for me, this when I study about other religions, it helps me appreciate my faith more. It doesn't make me think, oh my gosh, there's other religions, and that must mean mine's wrong too, because we must all be making it up if we have different perspectives. That's not true. There's a lot of commonality, and the Christianity isn't even the only religion, and this is, I guess, this is a for the last few comments. This is kind of a promo for my next awake, which will be on the Eastern religions like Buddhism, right? Um, Even once you get further into seeking the truth in faith, let's just say you're a seeker and you're looking at different religions. There are the organized religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity challenge even the tribal understandings of what heaven and hell is and what's important. So a Buddhist, for example, probably, especially a Mariana Buddhist, um, will not say that gods and demons don't exist, but he does believe that in the end they are inconsequential. And he would look past this need for magical power because the whole point of Buddhism is a kind of detachment. But there's different kinds of detachment. So a mystic trying to find enlightenment is different from St. John of the Cross who's trying to be one with God. And that has to be worked out, right? So once you're past the idea of questioning the tribal, more pantheistic religions, and you think, well, maybe there's an even higher realm, something that's even more meaningful than what does this god do? What does that god do? Let's go to the shaman. Let's trust the magic man. And maybe have a tribal dance. Maybe there's something deeper. Well, there's still even more discussions to be had. It's a never-ending search for truth that always ends up at the feet of Jesus Christ if you search him honestly. There's the poem "The Rime of the Ancient Mariner" and "The Ghost of the Navigator" by Iron Maiden, a great song for me, right? Don't give up. Don't be a pseudo-intellectual. Don't give up on seeking truth. Don't be lazy and say, "Oh, I figured it all out, man. There's no God," or "Oh, I figure it out. I'll just smoke a joint." Especially for the men out there, be a man and search for truth, and that's the point of our existence. Search for truth with your whole heart because it's worth it. If you can find something eternal and infinite that gives you meaning, that changes your life, eternity is worth it. Okay? And I hope it brings you to the fullness of truth, which is Jesus Christ and the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And that's why I'll never give up, and why the HHL will never give up, and why you shouldn't give up. And the skeptics who are searching, that are starting to regret what they opened up, they should listen to Dr. Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Begot and maybe consider that this is the Holy Spirit knocking at their door now that they've been humbled, trying to get them to see the error of their ways, the error of atheism and materialism, which is killing millions of people every day. Not every day, every year. So maybe we could do a little something different. Just saying. 200 plus million people killed via materialism, atheism, and communism. Maybe it's time to think things over a little bit. Maybe this whole no God thing might not be the best idea. But this is one last thing I want to leave you with. I know I'm going over the mark, but have you guys heard of the Bushmen in Africa? Right? We know who the Bushmen are. Well, lo and behold, I looked them up and what they did, and they actually, through their shamanization prayer thing, they hunt deer and antelope. They track them psychically, and they get the animal to halt and move certain places, and they can hunt deer hundreds of miles away uh, without any footsteps. So you see these guys running and running and running and running to catch their prey. They're using some kind of psychopomp animism that they learned from their forefathers and from this, and so they're psychically tracking animals. And there's a study on this. They interviewed them and say, yes, I become like the animal and all the animal spirits, and that's why I find the food that's on the table. Um, so again, that's just another point to why no, religion was not made up. It was practically a part of survival. It was a glue to society, especially in these kind of small tribal things. So there is something they're tapping into there. So that's just another interesting point to something maybe you didn't know when you watch the Discovery Channel. You see these guys running everywhere. So that's it. Hope it was entertaining. I hope it was enlightening. I hope it cleared up some of the nonsense, the academic, smart people um, that aren't so smart, and what they've done to our way of thinking. And there's way more to discussion to be had. Now that once the supernatural's out of the bag, you have to find what is the best interpretation of it, what spirit should we listen to, and y'all know where I'm heading. But the next podcast will be on Buddhism, and I have a book, An Unexpected Way, of a Catholic who used to be Buddhist, and he's going to explain the differences. And maybe I'll bring in I forget the name of the guy on the top of my head. That Thomas off in Seeds of the Contempt of Contemplation. What's his name? I'm going to Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton and An Unexpected Way. So if you want to read ahead, do a little homework, check the writings of them out to understand the differences. So it might be good for evangelization. So that's it, guys. God bless, and hope you have a great rest of the